Thank you for joining our Rise Up Ramarley webinar. On behalf of the Thurgood Marshall Institute at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, we welcome you all. My name is Carmen Dixon. I am the Policing Reform Organizer at the NAACP LDF. This webinar is actually being presented in collaboration with the the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College. And so in the next hour, we'll hear from an esteemed panel of organizers and attorneys who've been working on police reform issues in New York City and beyond. This afternoon, we'll talk specifically about the case of Ramarley Graham, a young black man killed by police from the 47th Precinct in the Bronx, New York City. To date, none of the officers involved have been held accountable. And so we are joined for this discussion by Ms. Constance Malcolm, who is the mother of Ramarley Graham. We're joined by Lurie Favors from the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College. And we're also joined by Rahel, Tika from Black Youth Project 100. My colleague from LDF, Angel Harris, is actually unable to join us today. So thank you all for participating with us today. I actually want to offer a very special thank you to Constance Malcolm. Your work and presence continues to inspire many across the country. And so we'll actually want to start with you, Constance. Can you just share a little bit about us, the events that actually led up to your son's death?
Okay, first I want to say thank you for having me on and continue to have my son name out in the public so people can remember what happened to him. I'm just going to start by saying what happened on February 2nd. This is the day they murdered my son. On February 2nd, I was at work. I got a phone call from the tenant that lives on the first floor, asked me if I was home. And I said, no, I was on my way home. And he says to me, okay, because there's a lot of police in the yard. So I'm not thinking of anything about it because, you know, this area is always police roaming around. So then I told him I was on my way, so I got another phone call from him, and it's like suspicious because normally he doesn't call me like this. And he said, "Are you still not home?" And I said, "No, I'm on my way." But before the second time he called me, I tried back, but I couldn't get him, and I'm like, but he just called me, and I'm not getting him. So when I got him the second time, that's when he asked me if I'm still not home yet, and I said, "No, I'm on my way." So after that, I called Frank, which is Ramarley's dad, and I asked him to come to the house to check what was going on, because Frank lives in Harlem, but he always in this area. He comes to the barber. He has friends live up this way. So when I called him, he was in Manhattan because he had a doctor appointment. So I got here before him. So when I got here, there was a whole bunch of police on the block. You know, everybody just standing around looking because apparently people didn't know what was really happening. They know just shot fired, but they didn't know what happened. So when I came, they was like, my house was blocked off. So I walked up to the police that was on the side across the street, and I told him who I was. I gave him my ID, and I said, you know, I live in this apartment here. And he says, hold on. So it's like back and forth with the police coming and going. And finally a white shirt came. I don't remember if it's a captain or a sergeant. And he says to me, can I go to the precinct? So I was like, sure, because it didn't look like anything happened. Everybody's face was so like nothing, you know, normal to me. So when I got in the police car, he took me to the precinct. When I got to the precinct, they took me upstairs to where they do the investigation. At this point, nobody still haven't told me anything. So he said to me, the cop that took me to the precinct, can you sit on this bench? It was a bench in the hallway in the precinct. And he said, can you sit on this bench and wait? I said, all right. I sat on the bench. He proceeded to walk over to another police officer in a suit on the other side of the door. It's a little short little door, and he said to the police, I'm coming from the homicide. And I'm like, the homicide? So at the time, nobody said anything to me. When he said it, I'm like, what homicide, you know? So after that, it's like I froze, but I still didn't pick up at what's going on. So here come my mom. They dragging my mom in, and she blurted out, because everybody called me Little Miss. She said, Little Miss, they killed Marley. So I'm like, I'm thinking like, she crazy. You know, she don't know what she's talking about. But then I remember what he had just said about a homicide. So then she's crying, trying to tell me what happened. Then my phone rang. Then Frank called, and Frank asked me what was going on. I tried to explain to him. He asked me where my mom was, and I said, she right here. They're taking her to talk to her. He said to me, no, don't let him talk to her because she doesn't have an attorney. I turned around and said it to the police. Listen, you cannot talk to her. She doesn't have an attorney. They basically just pushed her to the back and locked her in the room in the back. At this time, I don't know where they taken her. I'm like standing there, don't know what to do. So I'm like, there's not much I could do. So I ran back to where they took her. It was a whole bunch of like 3 doors or so back there. I started pounding on the door. So finally one door opened, and I see my mom standing there trying as if she was trying to cops, like one of them barring the door, one was hold her inside the door. So I reached in with my hand, I tried to pull her out by her jacket. One officer pulled her back in, and the other one came out, and then that's the one that assaulted me because I was trying to find out what happened. And after that, they locked her back in the room. The officer that assaulted me and him was like basically struggling outside because he twisted my arm behind me, shoved me to the floor, and I was crying. At this time now, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, okay, I don't even know where my baby was. Shinar was 6 at the time. I didn't know where he was. So I'm like, my only thing is now to go find him. So I had a whole bunch of people there. I left, some of my cousin was there, my aunt was there. I said, stay with my mom because they had her locked up in the room. So there's no way I could get to her. So I'm like, okay, I have to go find my son. So I told some people to stay there. Before I left, there was a whole bunch of people there. They was just concerned about we being quiet and they're gonna lock us up and they're gonna throw us out of the precinct. So I left. I came back to the block to find my son. So this time they moved the barricade down to the White Plains Road. Again, Chuck Berkeley he's a retired officer. He's a friend of Frank. Came with Frank, and I was telling him I don't know where my son is. He showed the officer his badge, back and forth again. Finally, they brought my son to me. What happened is on the video you could see they brought my son out. He just had a T-shirt on and his underwear because he had just came from school. So they brought him, Chuck going back and forth with them, and they finally brought him to me. At this time, I don't know anything because I was not home. So when I finally got to my mom now, after 7 hours, they had her in the precinct. Even when my attorney came trying to find out what happened, they was telling him that she wasn't there. They don't know what he's talking about. They're covering up the windows, all the police and the sergeant in there laughing as if it was a joke. I just lost my son, and these people acting like a joke. No one want to give me any information. Not even my attorney. This is how disrespectful they are. My attorney was there. They didn't want to give him any information, and it's a back and forth with them. So finally, after 7 hours, they had my mom there. When they finally let her out, she just ran out of the precinct because she was so scared. She never been in no police precinct before. She don't know anything about here or how the police system work. So even my lawyer was trying to talk to her. She was so nervous. I had to take her to the hospital, where her blood pressure was so sky high. Her and Frank's blood pressure went almost 200 because of the whole incident. After that, we was going. The DA presented the case to a grand jury. After 4 months, they came back with an indictment. Let me back up a little bit. After my son was killed, that he was killed that Thursday. I couldn't find my son's body for 4 days.
Oh.
After I found his body, it was on the wrong name. So, and the speaker, Cole Hasty, is the one that actually found it for me, because when he called me to find out what happened, to hear the side of what happened, and I told him this, he went and he made some phone calls, and that's how we found it, and that it was on the wrong name. So this is to show you how these police officers, how they, discuss them, because they already knew who my son was, because my mom told them everything. They asked her who was living in the house, everybody named that was living in the house. So they knew, why would you do this after you know what you already just did? So after 4 months, Officer Richard Hayes was indicted on manslaughter 1 and manslaughter 2. We was going to court for a whole year, and then Judge Stephen Barrett decided to throw out the case on a technicality. They gave us the option to go back to the grand jury or appeal. I didn't want to appeal because appeal, it takes a long time, and it goes on for years, and people have short span memory. So I didn't want people to forget who Ramarley was and what the case was about. They immediately after put out a video that Ramarley was running. even today, if you talk to people, you hear them say the young man that was running. My son was never running. They put that video out there. If you looked at the video, the person that's running had gray color clothes in, and you look at the video, because it's 4 videos that show my son walking. The one from the street where they claim that they saw him walking with his 2 friends, the one that he turned the corner to walk home, and the one that was actually on the apartment where I live. So they put out this video, showed this person running, and said it was my son. Actually, it was never my son. The media never went back and retract that story or even try to fix it. They always said that he was chased, and it was never so. So after 4 months that he was charged with a manslaughter 1 and manslaughter 2, was going to court for the whole year. Judge Stephen Barrett decided to throw the case on a technicality. Then we opted to go back to the grand jury. The second grand jury chose not to indict. So the feds came in the same day they threw out the case. The feds came in and picked up the case and said they was going to investigate. They was going to investigate the case. They had the case for a while. We kept on reaching out to them to find out what was going on. So they said they was looking into the case, and then they went to look into investigate. And this past March, they told us they can't do anything. So right now, the case is basically over with the local and the feds. So my fight is with Mayor de Blasio to find all these officers involved. It was over 12 officers that was involved in the killing of my son. They even went so far as assaulting my mom, threatening her to shoot her and lock her up, because when they shot my son, she was trying to help him. And Richard Hayes, the one that shot my son, pushed her down and used profanity to her and tell her if she don't shut up, he's going to shoot her too. So I don't understand how the feds would just say they can't do anything after. To me, we don't have any rights anymore, because my son was in his home, committed no crime, didn't do anything wrong. Yesterday he's dead, and the feds wouldn't even pursued with the case. Let the court decide if there's a case or not. You don't pick it up, because they told me that they investigate, and to me, you didn't do any investigation, because to me, I felt like they took all the evidence that they had from the locals, the DA office, and went over that, because they never came to the scene after crime. The feds never came here. So I don't understand how they say they did a third investigation. Well, if anybody to see my apartment, it's so tiny, the hallway could only fit but 1 person, and you looking on a spreadsheet or a paper of a layout of the house is totally different from you being in the space of a house. And I felt like with the feds, they didn't do a good enough job for me.
Yeah. Well, Constance, thank you so much for sharing, and probably in many ways having to relive the day in which your son was killed. So thank you again for taking us through. I just want to ask Lurie. So the Center for Law and Social Justice has a deep history in the fight against police brutality. And so we know that unfortunately, cases like Ramarley's are actually not new. And we know about the abysmal history of the local DA's willingness and ability to bring charges. But actually, can you talk to us about why it's so difficult to secure federal indictments against police?
So, yes, and I, definitely want to give my just heartfelt condolences to Miss Constance and what you were experiencing and what your family experienced. And I think it's important that we recognize that what you described sounds very much like a scene out of a movie depicting a slavery moment where a child is killed or sold away, and a parent and a family that remains has very little recourse and very little options for how you're going to seek some sort of justice or even recognition that what happened to you was wrong, right? And at the Center for Law and Social Justice, which, as you mentioned, is a 30-year institution that is the only legal center that's focused on the legal needs of Black Brooklyn, Black New Yorkers, and disenfranchised communities. We recognize that current police practices and the systems that are designed to maintain and support them, right, because they don't exist in isolation, that those things are born out of a history of slavery, slave patrols, white supremacy, and that they come from and are maintained by people and institutions who in that time in the past were committed to maintaining the social hierarchy and norms that were implemented by slavery and maintained throughout the regime of white supremacy. And at CLSJ, we recognize that we're all historical products. Who we are today, the systems we have today, are results of the choices that created them yesterday, right? And so that's sort of the way we have to understand how some of the limitations that it currently exists as it pertains to seeking justice, how they came to be, and what it is, and the history that they're tied to. And for federal cases, it's almost impossible in many ways to prove a lot of these cases at the state level, right? I mean, we can have an entire webinar just dedicated to the multiple ways that on the state level, these cases can easily be swept under the rug. But on the federal level, it's even that much more difficult, because federal prosecutors have to prove that a person or a police officer used excessive force willfully, right? And that willfully is important. It doesn't mean it was reckless. It doesn't mean that the officer was negligent. It doesn't mean that the officer was careless. It means that the officer was willful, that they intended to do this particular thing on purpose. And quite frankly, it's very difficult to prove what someone was thinking, right? It's very difficult to prove what their motive was when it comes to these types of cases. And motive is one of the main legal stumbling blocks for prosecutors in charging law enforcement officers with civil rights violations. And this goes back to a case dating back to the mid-1940s. And I mention that date in particular because timing is important, right? We need to think about what else was happening in the 1940s when these legal decisions were being made. But in the mid-1940s, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling that essentially said that you have to be able to demonstrate that an officer was intentional. They were intentionally depriving this person of their rights. And in this case, that would mean that the officer in question was intentional about depriving Ramarley of his civil rights, and that he either wanted or intended to either kill or injure the person. Not just that it was an accident. And when you introduce modern or common phrasing where police officers say things like, "I feared for my life," I didn't know, I thought he had a gun, I was afraid, then all of a sudden you have to balance that "I was afraid and I feared for my life" with the idea that I intentionally killed this person. And because of the deference that we often give to police officers and to police agencies, they are believed almost by default by broader society. And so when an officer says, "Yes, I killed this person, I feared for my life," and we heard this language with Mike Brown, we see this in case after case where an officer's fear is of blackness, really, which is in many cases is what it is considered justifiable, right? And a grand jury or a court, they're really looking at who they're going to believe more. And in a society that has made the criminalization of Black bodies sort of the norm and has codified that in the way we execute our laws and how we look at Black people from the legal justice system perspective, it's easy to see how this type of standard, saying that I intentionally wanted to kill this person, is really, really hard to prove. Even if you can show that the person was getting a beat down, even if you can show that the officers were engaged in some horrific behaviors, if they feared for their life and their fear was reasonable, then that's going to be it's going to be that much more difficult to say that that officer intended to kill that person or intended to deprive them of their right to a trial by jury as a right to a trial by ordeal. So we have an almost impossible standard, right? Rarely are you going to have a smoking gun. It's going to be difficult in any circumstance for a prosecutor to get an officer to say or to demonstrate an officer intentionally wanted to kill that person or intentionally wanted to injure that person. And because of that standard, it's almost as if you're in an impossible situation. And this is where, from the Center for Law and Social Justice, part of our work is also conveying to our community how limited the law is and how difficult it is for the law to actually provide justice in cases where race and racism are driving forces or may have some impact on what happened in that way. So it is an uphill battle. We have multiple reports that come out on multiple cities and police departments from the Department of Justice, and those reports are helpful. Those reports often confirm what the Black community has been saying, that the community feels as though, or the community is under attack and is policed in a way that would not be acceptable in non-Black spaces. And yet, despite those reports, despite the recognition of institutional racism that drives a lot of these outcomes, that particular standard, proving intent, it's a really tough row to hoe, as my grandmother would say. And so it's almost it almost becomes an impossibility in many ways. And you'll find stats that show that, unfortunately, the Department of Justice has not been able to prosecute a number of these cases, in the vast majority of cases, because the standard for proving intent is just simply too high.
Yeah. Thank you, Lurie, for definitely shedding some light on, you know, why it's often so difficult to hold police accountable here in this case. I think that's actually a nice segue into a couple of questions I want to ask Rahel. And so, Rahel, I know that BYP 100 has actually taken a very interesting approach in attempts to prevent police and state violence. And can you just talk about some of BYP's invest divest frame?
Sure. I think that in a lot of these cases of police officers acting with impunity, police officers not being held accountable, there's like this basic understanding that in doing wrong, in doing the wrong thing, that police officers are not doing their job, or that when police officers are not held accountable, that the system is broken. And I think that the divest-invest model kind of goes back to what Lurie was just talking about. The system is not broken. The system is functioning just as it was meant to. These rules are in place on purpose. Certain language around protection of police officers, that kind of almost makes police officers like above other humans, right, is on purpose. And the effect of it is to create a class of, or a job that can enact this racism of society without impunity. And so it creates a situation where a whole community knows to be fearful of police officers, right? And we're taught from a young age to talk to police officers a certain way, to be a certain way around police officers. But what we're learning more and more as these numbers start climbing is that it doesn't matter, because if we have decided that police officers are above human mistake, whatever, and above accountability, then when they do kill you, regardless of how you were behaving, regardless of what you did, they will make it okay after the fact, and that they will rewrite history to make what they did acceptable, because that's what the system is in place for them to do. And they don't need to bend any rules to do it, because the rules are already bending for them. And so if we accept that, and with the way that things have been going the last few years, there's no way but to accept that as the reality of the current system. The only other choice is to create our own system. So that means like divesting, not just financially, but divesting personnel, divesting energy, divesting all of these things from systems that do not keep us safe, from systems that were never meant to keep us, especially black folks, safe, and investing in systems that could keep us safe, and investing in things that could create a safe community. So that means divesting from policing, divesting from jails, divesting from prisons, divesting from a criminal justice system that has shown us time and again that our best interest is not what it has in mind, and investing in things that could keep us safe. So investing in quality education, investing in actual affordable housing, investing in quality health care, paying folks a living wage. Like, these are things that we know and have been proven to increase quality of life, that when you have better public education, when you have better health care, when you have living wages, the quality of life increases. There's nothing about the current model of policing that has ever been shown to improve quality of life. In fact, it just creates a whole other part of society to be afraid of, right? And I think that, like, cases like, the fight that Constance has been putting up for all these years, and the fact that, and the way that she's been directing her energy towards this, like, beast of a system, if it does nothing else, it shows us that this system has grown too large, and to try to shift it and to try to change this little thing or change that little thing is beyond where we are now, and that we need to start just taking resources away and infusing them in our own communities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rahel. About some of the demands that BYP is making of police unions, and also the role of police unions in these specific cases, and your recent campaigns addressing them.
Yes. So police unions are one of the many mechanisms that have been put into place by the criminal justice system and by police officers and by the systems above them to protect police officers to never have to face accountability. So the 3 demands that BYP 100 has put forth is to disband the PBA, the FOP. So PBA is the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. FOP is a Fraternal Order of Patrolmen. To disband these structures, disband these unions, because they don't operate as unions the way that you understand like a labor union to work. What they do is they guard police officers from being held accountable, and they by withholding information, by pressuring politicians, and through all these like really like dark mechanisms that other unions do not use. So that's our first demand. The second demand is to divest from systems that don't keep us safe. And invest in systems that could keep us safe, right? So that means exactly what I was talking about before. And I think that demand itself is one that people often pick at and feel like they don't have, that they can say it doesn't make sense, that we haven't thought it through. What does it mean to divest and invest? The NYPD budget at this point in time is like beyond the budget of any other New York City resource, right? It's bigger than the budget for public schools. It's bigger than the budget for public health. And for what? The most notable thing that the NYPD has done is through stop and frisk, through like various cases, like the case of Akai Gurley, the case of Ramarley Graham, has been to cause fear in Black communities, and to even like the staggering like statistics about how many more NYPD officers there are in New York City public schools than guidance counselors. It's very simple when you talk about divest, invest. It's clear that we have invested way too much and into policing, and that it's done nothing to keep us safer, and it's done nothing to improve quality of life, especially for Black folks. And so that's divest, invest. And the third demand, I'm sorry, I think I'm freezing, y'all.
You're good.
Am I okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so the third demand is that sorry.
Yeah, you're good on
I
this
said
one.
divest, invest. I said dismantle the PBA.
Divest from policing.
Invest in our communities. I'm so sorry. I always lose the last demand. And when we were specifically in New York City, it was different from place to place, right? But specifically in New York City, we were demanding that the officer responsible for shooting, Officer Wayne Isaacs, who was responsible for the most recent shooting of a Black community member in New York City, be fired. And I think along with that comes firing the officers responsible for the murder of Ramarley Graham. It means holding accountable the officers responsible for the death of Akai Gurley. It means across the nation holding responsible the officers responsible for the death of Ayanna Stanley Jones. And it's just like the fact that we can, as Black people, so easily name off these community members who have been killed by police officers goes to say that we know that officers are not being held accountable. And we know that the only way that they will be held accountable is if we begin to like divest all of these resources, and also just divest the attitude that like police officers can do no wrong and are held accountable by virtue of their job, and really, really hold them accountable on a real basis, whether that be through the criminal justice system or through just like loss of their job.
Yeah. Thank you, Rahel, for the sort of comprehensive platform that BYP is working on, and thank you for the work that you're doing as well. You mentioned, firing all the officers, so I just wanted to circle back around to Constance and ask you, you had mentioned meeting with Mayor de Blasio, and so or requesting a meeting with Mayor de Blasio. So can you sort of tell us a little bit about why you wanted to meet with the mayor and what the result of the request to meet with the mayor have been?
Okay, I've been trying to meet with Mayor de Blasio for months now, and he refused to. His excuse is it's an ongoing case. But my thing is to him, you met with James Blake, and his investigation was on investigation too. When you met him, when these officers tackled him outside his hotel, I'm talking about a tennis player that they tackled outside, and you met with him. So my thing to you is, why? Because I'm a poor black woman living in a poor black community, you refuse to meet with me, but you could meet with this man. We have the same, not so much the same case, because he didn't die, but they practically roughed him up. You met with him. Why you can't meet with me? My son was killed, and you refuse to meet with me. It's over 12 officers that was involved in the killing of my son and the cover-up. Yes, Richard Hayes pulled the trigger, but it was over 12 officers that backed up Richard Hayes' lies. And we don't even know their name. We're trying to get their name. Mayor de Blasio refused to give the name, and that little fool Bratton also just go out and say craziness, and then de Blasio just go behind him and talk about all the craziness he's talking about that don't even make any sense. That both of them just look ridiculous together. So, you know, he won't meet with me, and I don't understand why. I don't get it, you know. You say you want the community to engage with police and have a better relationship. This is a perfect example to start by doing that. People in this community is really upset because nobody knows what really happened. These officers got to pay. Richard Hayes got to pay over $25,000 after he murdered my son. So what you telling me, to kill a black boy, you weren't getting a raise or get a promotion? That's basically what you're telling me. And this is what happened with Ramarley case. Richard Hayes got a $25,000 pay raise, and de Blasio keep on going like nothing has happened. Every time we try to talk to him, he refuses to talk to us. You know, any space he's at, when you call his office to ask for accountability or demand accountability, his staff hangs up on you. As soon as they hear my son's name, they hang up. Why are you hanging up? I'm a mother just trying to figure out what the hell happened to her child. So I don't understand why you can't tell me what happened. This is my son. I'm entitled to know what happened. First of all, the local system fails me, the feds fails me, and I refuse to let this officer stay on payroll in my community or any other community working as a police officer. He doesn't deserve to work as a police officer, because if he could come in somebody's house and shoot them, and when he got bail the day of the arraignment, he laughed. He was outside laughing with his registered police friends, laughing about, you the man. What man? You are a coward. You say you were scared for your life, but yes, too, your back was turned to a door. Supposed to be the person on the next side had a gun, and then you ran up in a house that don't even know what the layout of the house look like. It's 3 floors. You don't even know where you was going. So how you was scared? I don't get that. And this mayor, like I told you, he's gonna be a one-term mayor. There's no way he's gonna get another term in this city, and I'm campaigning for that myself.
Thank you for your passion, Constance. Thank you so much. And so, like you said, Richard Hayes is definitely still on payroll, as well as the other officers. All 12 of the officers, as far as we know, are still on payroll. Lurie, can you just kind of talk about...
1 second, Carmen. And
Sure.
the only one they're really going after is Richard Hayes, and it's rightfully so. But what about the ones that covered up also? They need to be reprimanded too, if not fired.
Absolutely. And so, to that end, Lurie, can you kind of talk about the role of police officers' pensions, and how the idea of police officers' pensions being in jeopardy has been thrown around, and what do you think are some new and creative strategies to combat police violence that can be considered?
So, quite frankly, police officer pensions are one of the safest pension plans one can have in this country. I mean, you can engage in acts that take life. You can engage in acts that abuse people wrongfully. You can engage in a whole host of things, and you're not going to technically be fired. You're not going to lose your pension. And even if you have to resign, you still have access to your pension. And I say even if you have to, because many times, as was relayed by Ms. Constance, you simply don't. You will oftentimes be promoted. And even though you engaged in an act that by the popular public's understanding of what is normal would make you a bad officer, meaning you're bad at your job, you're still going to have access to that sort of protection. I think, as Rahel mentioned earlier, you get the super protections that are offered to almost a superhuman status. So what that means is that, for example, there are a lot of ways that money can come into play that might have some impact on policing practices that we currently typically don't employ. So the idea of letting officers know, if you engage in excessive use of force, your pension is at risk. You're not going to have access to guaranteed money to support you for the rest of your life, paid for by taxpayers, if you engage their lives at risk. There's issue that when you get a police settlement, even if you are able to successfully file your civil claim against the police after the fact, and you're awarded a settlement, that settlement typically comes from municipal city coffers, which means that it's impacting the budgets of educators, it's impacting the budgets of hospitals, everything else that is determined by your city budget is negatively impacted when one of these large settlements has to be paid out because of the wrongful acts of police officers. And it would be really powerful, and this is something that a number of groups have advocated, certainly not just CLSJ, but it would be extraordinarily powerful if we were to say, okay, you are going to protect police officers, fine, you're also going to have to bear the burden of that cost for protecting police officers. And if you have police officers that are engaged in excessive use of force, such that incidents like what happened to Ramarley can take place almost with impunity, then you're going to have to pay for that. That's coming directly out of your budget. It's going to come directly out of your local police department, so that you bear the pain, the financial pain that comes as a result of protecting people who engage in bad acts. And I think one thing Ms. Constance mentioned that's important, we know the name of the shooter in this case, but there is an entire system of other people, 11, 12 other people who participated in the cover-up. So even if the shooter were to be punished or to be fired, which seems almost seems impossible when officers aren't at least fired at the very least when these types of things happen. But again, that speaks to the protections that they have through their unions. If that's going to take place, not going to take place, you're often given a raise or promoted, and so it really doesn't allow the person or the agency or the system who caused the pain to bear the brunt of that pain. And in fact, that pain is borne out by other communities that really need access to those resources. And so right now, there are a number of other items that people have been talking about, ways that could hopefully add some additional pressure to impact what's happening on the policing at local and national levels. So advocating for national data reporting, right? Like right now, we're not really getting good numbers on use of force incidents, traffic, pedestrian stops that are disaggregated by race or by ethnicity or by gender, information that we need in order to really be able to grapple with the way policing policies are negatively impacting specific communities. One of the things that CLSJ has been a huge advocate for was promoting expanded role of special prosecutors because of what we call almost the incestuous relationship between local district attorneys and police unions and police officers. Having a special prosecutor who is an outside person, someone who doesn't have that same type of relationship, take over those cases, and where there can be some impartiality built into again, leaking departments to data collection and to training. It shouldn't be that our federal government, which we've already acknowledged has its hands tied in many ways when it comes to prosecuting these cases because of the need to prove intent. If there's funding that's coming from the federal level down to state police departments, that funding should have some conditions, right? That funding should say, if you're going to engage in these sorts of practices, you're not going to get access to this fund or these monies. And so again, hitting them in the pocket, because that seems to be one of the only places that actually causes people to make change, is when you hit them on an economic level. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about the need for our community and the communities that deal with the brunt of these types of policing practices to really engage in this sort of long-term discussion about not just the moment that the shooting happens, right? Not just the protest against that particular officer, but really looking at long-term engagement and struggle with this overall system, and thinking much more long-term and strategically with how we want to approach, police officers who are found to have implicit bias. Should they be allowed to police in our communities? These are questions we need to be asking ourselves, even as we're wrestling with the very basic economic structure of the way that bad policing is often rewarded because there's no pain that's actually extracted as against the bad actor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Lurie. I think that really sheds a bit of light on particularly how our communities actually have to double pay. So we lose our loved ones, and then we actually have to bear the cost via taxpayer funds, our taxpayer funds, you know, to pay out the families and settlements and whatnot. I did want to go back to Constance, and if you could just talk about, so we're aware that the city actually issued a statement that the DOJ requests they not meet with you until after the investigation was completed. Can you kind of talk about what happened there?
With the DOJ.
Yeah.
Again, Bratton is out there running his mouth. What happened? Bratton had a conversation with some council members and told the council members that the DOJ asked them to hold off on the internal investigation with the police. And when we met with the DOJ, they was like dumbfounded, didn't know what we was talking about, and they was like, we never told them that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is show you, you have the top brass, Bratton, talking out of his side of his mouth. What do you expect the rest of his flock to follow him doing? They're going to lie just like him. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Hmm.
And this is the problem, because they lie so much, they start to believe their own lies.
Yeah.
And, when we asked them, they was just looking at us like, looking at each other, their head was going like a barber doll, like, what are you talking about? We never had that conversation with them. We never told them anything. Just why would he even said that if nobody told him that?
Yeah.
I know he wasn't on the force when my son was killed, but you've been there long enough to know what was going on. So for you to come and say that, that's just very disrespectful and blunt and lie.
Right. So I guess we're getting to see the extent to which the extent to which the police force is willing to go in order to cover up details of the case and really not be held accountable. And so then we circle back around to what we can do to hold them accountable. And so we know that the work of the campaign, Rise Up for Ramarley, is now to have New York City fire all of the police officers involved in Ramarley's death. So, Constance, can you talk about the strategy? And I know folks are really wanting to know how they can support the case and move forward.
Well, we have a number of stuff coming up. If you follow me on Rise Up for Ramarley, you will know all the events that we planning. Right now, we asking people to call Mayor de Blasio office demanding that they fired all these officers, and because they don't deserve to wear a badge or carry a gun if this is a mentality that they have to just kill people, whether it's Ramarley, black, brown, because it's just sad. Every day you turn around, it's another young man be killed by police unjustified, and then they turn around and lie about it, and then they just walk free. They go home to their family as if nothing happened, while we have to sit here and struggle trying to figure out what happened or try to get answer. Why these people go about their everyday life? And I think it's very unfair, because even as a mother, it's been 4 years I've been out here fighting to get answer, and these people that's supposed to give me the answer refuse to give me the answers of what happened to my son. So my fight is right now with Mayor de Blasio to fire all the officers. And like I said, you just follow me on Rise Up for Ramarley, you on Twitter, and you'll find out what's going on. And I think you'll have the information you could put up on website so that people could have it and follow me and get the information, because the fight doesn't end here. We have a long road ahead of us, because it doesn't take one day to dismantle this system. We've been going through this for hundreds of years. It didn't take one day to get voters' rights. So, we know it's going to take a long time. But if we stand tall and the demands that we have right now, we have a movement, Black Lives Matter. We have a movement to stay on that and let people know that we are tired, we are fed up, and we're not going to sit down anymore and take it. We're going to make changes. Like you was talking about the special prosecutor. I'm one of the person that was on that to get that change, to get one of the mother that signed on to that letter to get a special prosecutor whenever an armed person is killed unjustified or a questionable shooting, that the DO it takes away the power from the DO from the locals, and then Eric Schneiderman office would investigate it. So I think that's a step in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go. And for the fight for Ramarley, just continue supporting and follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and then you would know what's going on, and that way we could help tell a friend to tell a friend, and then we could get changes, because change for Ramarley is change for every black boy and girl in the city.
All right. So you talked about the role, you talked about rising up and building momentum and movements and moments, and the role of other families. So I did want to ask you, what is the role that other families are actually playing in the growing movement?
We know we have families. They come out, they support, and right now we have Muhammad Bar case, which is another African American man that was killed in the Bronx, which is actually is Miss Diallo's best friend. Miss Diallo is Amadou Diallo's mom, and we have that case. We have Mr. Smalls. You see again where the cop lied. How this man came in the car, punched him, and do all these things to him, not knowing again the video is there. So these videos out there. Keep having your videos up, because this is showing what the police are doing. Even though sometimes the cameras are there, they don't care. Pantaleo waves to the camera, hello, I don't care. I just talked to a man on national TV, and he's up there waving like, what they gonna do to me? I'm just gonna get a desk duty for a couple of months and then go right back on payroll and do what the hell I want to do. So we as mother out here, we in this club that none of us wanted to be in. We didn't choose to be here. They threw us in this club. And we have to out here fighting, and we band together as mother because we lost somebody. We all share the same pain. It might be in different ways, but we share a loss for a son or a sister that lost Chantel Davis. We don't even know what's going on with that case in Brooklyn. Chantel Davis was killed like a couple weeks after Ramarley, and you don't even hear about Chantel. But that's a case that people need to pay attention to, because Philip Hopkins was in Flatbush, acting like Rambo, beating up people, robbing drug dealers, and you don't see nothing happen to him. So these are a lot of cases that we try to uplift other family members that you might not know about their case. And as family, we try to do that to let people know you're not alone. Mother, you're not alone. Father, you're not alone. You don't hear too much about father, but you have fathers that are on the front line that's fighting, and you don't hear about them. But we are here, and we're not going anywhere. So no matter what, we are a family. We became a family. We have an extended family right now. And we support each other. We might just talk on the phone. You don't even have to be about our case, but anything they might be going through. And we have a bond, and we try to, keep that bond and just talk to each other and let everyone know it's going to be all right. People, we have family that's be like, Constance, I see your case, and if they didn't do nothing in your case, they're not going to do anything in my case. No, don't give up, because every case is different.
Yeah. Thank you for really showing us the power of unity and coming together, and we do appreciate that. So I would ask, we're going to get ready to close up. We have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to ask Lurie and Rahel to provide some closing remarks in about 4 minutes each, whatever you want to say, and include next steps as well. What folks should be doing, I guess. Lurie, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think I think that it's important for people to recognize that this moment is situated in a larger history, and that we did not get here yesterday. This is not something that is new. This is actually, it has a very long history, something that we spoke about earlier. And that's important, because when you recognize the long-term protracted nature of what we're dealing with, you can sort of be a bit more discriminating in the efforts you put your energy behind, right? So the argument, and that can help you determine strategy and help you determine what's going to be most effective and what's going to be most beneficial. So, for example, there was a lot of effort put into body cameras and to having police officers wear body cameras. There were a lot of criticisms of that because, as we saw with Eric Garner, he died on camera. Like it wasn't one of those cases where you caught the end of it. Like we kind of saw the entire thing. And now we see there's a lot of concerns with the body cameras. All of a sudden they stop working right at key moments, or the audio isn't there, or they're broken, or they weren't turned on, or they were turned on and the officer turned them off. So we have to, I think, be far more discriminating in the solutions that we come up with and tie those solutions to recognizing the moment in history in which we stand. I think on a practical level, it is important to be a part of organizing spaces that are dedicated to dealing with these issues. A lot of times it can feel like you are on your own and isolated, struggling against whatever it is you may be struggling with, but there are organizations. BYP is one of them, Malcolm X Grassroots, all of these other organizations that are engaged in some long-term struggle and some long-term work, because these are not issues that have quick solutions. We're talking about changing systems, not just the individuals within those systems. I think that we need to do a lot of educating as it pertains to how other minority communities engage in some self-policing behaviors that minimize contacts that those communities may have with police forces that may or may not necessarily be kind or considerate or caring about them and their particular cultural needs. So, right now in Chicago, there's a bit of a debate because one of the police unions encourages officers to not take on overtime during Labor Day, which is notoriously one of the most challenging weekends as it pertains to violence. And so the community response has been, okay, we're going to deal with that because we have to deal with that, right? Like, what does it mean when officers aren't going to police during times when it's highly predictably going to be a violent time? But as we're dealing with that, we're also going to engage in some self-policing. We're also going to engage in what we're calling the peace surge. And I think it's interesting, and I think it's important that we're following movements like that, because that can really then spark some additional conversation about ways that the community can become more engaged and more active in ways that haven't been what we traditionally look to as challenging or engaging with police reform. But it's important to recognize that policy matters, right? It's not, protest is important, activism, being out in the streets is important. What I love about Black Lives Matter is that it is a great marriage between activism and policy. So we're getting reports, we're getting work from, organizations that are looking at Black Lives Matter and then issuing reports about what people can do about that. Organizations like justice.org, and of course, now that I need the names of them, it's going to fail me, but there are a number of groups that are engaged in not just looking at how we address that particular bad officer, but how we address the systems that allow that officer to flourish. Why is it that 12 other officers were able to help protect this officer and we don't even know who they are, right? So again, even if we get that one individual, the system that they operate in is such that we need to begin implementing solutions that are going to address that. Campaign Zero, that's what I was thinking of. So groups like the work being done by Campaign Zero and other organizations that are looking at how we shift long-term policies, those are very, very important. And it's necessary that we get engaged. It's necessary that we, people who are most powerfully impacted by these policing practices, are at the forefront of steering the conversation about what we think is going to be a solution. And because we want to make sure that the solutions are going to resonate with our community, we want to make sure that they're going to be culturally competent for what we think is valuable, what we think is these spaces. So, if you have local chapters of these organizations that you can get engaged with, I always encourage people to be a part of organizations. Doesn't matter to me which one. I've named a couple, but pick a dozen more, because this is systems work, right? And we're not just, sometimes we focus so much on deconstructing the system we live in that we don't spend a lot of time figuring out what a new system could look like. We don't spend as much energy on reconstructing what healthy policing practices would be. And so those are longer conversations, but those are things that we can grapple with. Those are things that we need to be wrestling with actively on a multi-generational level, from the youngest to the oldest, because as we've seen, it doesn't really matter how old you are, it doesn't matter how respectable your politics are, it doesn't matter how well you can change your voice and do all the things you need to do to fit into broader society. We are in a space where our fundamental humanity is continuously subjected to a white supremacist frame and will always fall on the short end of that stick. So we really have to begin taking a much more affirmative discussion, a much more affirmative seat at the table about what we're going to tolerate and about what we're not, both from without and from within our community.
All
so that was a lot. I'll try to stop there.
It was good. It was great. I also want to lift up another one of the groups that's doing issuing policy platforms, which includes M4BL, Movement for Black Lives, has just released on August 1st. A number of demands and policy platforms. Rahel, I'm going to kick it to you. You got about 3 minutes. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Rahel.
Okay. I just said that. Cool. I said that's plenty of time. I think that for me, it always just comes back to the same thing. Divest, invest, take money and energy away from things that are not keeping us safe, that are in fact like posing a danger to us all. There's a friend of mine who's in BYP also who always frames things in response to power. And it's a matter of like anything that you do, is this going to give more power to the state? Or is it taking power away? So same things like what, Lurie, I'm so glad you mentioned the body cameras, because I think a lot of people thought these body cameras were going to come and save us all, but it's giving more power to the state, right? Because then it also framed the argument of like, oh, why are we recording the cops if the cops have body cameras? Why, recording the cops is getting in the way of the cops doing their job, but they have body cameras. But body cameras, somehow, some way, in all of these shootings that in the case of Eric Garner, like physical chokehold deaths that we've seen, the video footage that is showing us what really happened is not coming from body cameras. It's coming from people on the street. I think that watching the cops, filming the cops is like a tangible next step that is difficult to ask folks to take, right? Because we've seen what's happened to the young man that filmed the murder of Eric Garner, and how he's just been like
targeted.
Really targeted in a huge way. But it's an important thing because it's a way to take the power back, that we have the power and we see you, and when we see you, everyone's going to see you. So that's one concrete way. Another concrete way is like Ms. Constance mentioned earlier, a lot of these families have put out calls for specific days of action. Last Wednesday, for example, folks across the city were calling Mayor de Blasio and saying, you know, why won't you meet with her? Why won't you talk about Ramarley Graham's case? And I think just paying attention to all those various families in your city, and paying attention to the asks that they put out, because the calls are being put out there, whether it be to come to a rally, whether it be to come to a press conference, whether it be to call the mayor's office, to pack the court when things are currently in session. So just like plugging into all of those things and being able to hear the real kind of calls to action that are being put out by these families that have, unfortunately, through no choice of their own, been made like kind of, you know, soldiers in this fight. Another major way to get plugged in and like take a next step is, Carmen, I'm so glad you mentioned the M4BL, Movement for Black Lives policy platform. Embedded in that platform is a lot of very specific next steps, right? So like if you're not a person who's in policy, but you work in the labor movement, right? There's some very specific next steps around labor that you can plug into. Earlier we talked about the PBA and various policemen's unions. Carmen, I know you're in a union, not Carmen, Constance, I know you're in a union. I've been in a union in the past. We know what unions actually... Oh, you are too? Okay.
Me too.
Okay, cool. So we know what unions do, right?
Yeah.
What unions are supposed to do. Police unions do not work that way. Police unions are supposed to protect you no matter what. No matter what. After the chokehold death of Eric Garner, Pat Lynch was everywhere, talking about how these policemen did the right thing, how we are trying to sully their names by calling, how dare the medical examiner call it a chokehold death, how dare the medical examiner call it a homicide. The medical examiner calls things homicides all the time when they are homicides. Like, that's what he does, you know what I mean? But that's not the normal, what we think of as a labor union, but this is what policemen unions do. Policemen unions are simply the muscle, the like policy or legal muscle behind the policemen, to be able to kind of like force the narrative forward in any way they want. Every time that a policeman is not held accountable, the police union has come out at the tail end and said, yes, that's justice. And so what does that mean? What does that mean that the function of a police union is? So that's like a thing to look for when you're thinking about how, like, if that's your like kind of like cut of the world, is like not policy but labor. If you're like kind of like part of the world is like thinking about participatory budgeting. Think about how you can plug into that. You can go to city council meetings. You can, on the local level, really influence where these these taxpayer dollars are going. And like Carmen mentioned, Carmen, Lurie, one of y'all mentioned earlier that the money for these payouts, it was Lurie, the money for these payouts when police officers are acting with complete impunity out here on these streets is not coming from the NYPD budget. It's not coming from your local police force budget. In fact, in the most recent civil suit payout, in the case of Akai Gurley, the child, Akai Gurley's daughter, was in the civil suit. Some amount of money was set aside for her. I believe it was like $3 million or something. Only $25,000 comes out of the pocket of the man who killed her father. The rest is coming out of the NYC budget, right? Why is that? Is it to make it so that officers feel safe to behave in the exact way that Peter Liang behaved, that ended in the death of this young lady's father? Like, this is systems that we are not, that don't already exist and that have already been created, but they're constantly being created. And these protections are making sure that the next generations of officers feel safe to behave in the same heinous ways that officers behind them have acted.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. We are about 1 minute past the 4 o'clock hour. I think we did pretty good on time. And so I just want to thank you all again for such an inspiring and informative conversation. Thank you, Rahel. Thank you, Lurie. And most certainly thank you, Constance, for joining us on this afternoon. We actually had a video, and we apologize that we were unable to play it's a short video on Ramarley's case. Unfortunately, we were unable to play it due to technical difficulties. But pay attention to riseupforramarley.org, and we'll probably be able to get that video out to you. I just want to very quickly thank Loida Colon from the Justice Committee and Ronald Sims, who is right here by my side. He's our digital communication specialist. And we invite our viewers to stay informed on Ramarley Graham's case by visiting www.riseupforramarley, that is the number 4, riseupforramarley.org, and you can keep abreast of LDF's race and policing reform work through our website at www.naacpldf.org. Thank you for logging on, and we look forward to future discussions. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.